Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Carlos Perez and welcoming you to Nova Southeastern University. I'm at the College of Psychology and I've got a few guests. And go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Taryn Goldberg. I am a postdoctoral resident this year at the Mailman Siegel Center at a couple clinics over there at the Unicorn Children's Clinic, the Developmental Assessment Clinic. I am supervised by Dr. Sohani Char. I'm also part of the Challenging Behaviors Clinic over here. And a little bit about me, I got my PhD in school psychology from the University of California, Riverside. I am a nationally certified school psychologist. And as I said, this year I am a postdoc resident.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Shirley Swatweiner. I'm the other postdoctoral trainee alongside Dr. Goldberg at the Developmental Assessment Clinic at the Mailman Siegel Center. And I'm also part of the Starting Right program, and I work under Dr. Char as well. And today we're going to be talking about effective ways to address children's challenging behavior. Okay, yeah, so we can go ahead to the first slide.
One moment, I'm going to try sharing again. For some reason, this slide was not advancing.
Thank you. Okay, so today we're going to be going over all of these topics that you can see here. So starting with what are challenging behaviors? How are these behaviors learned? We're going to be talking about just some behavior basics, how behaviors are maintained, and some strategies for helping your child's behavior. So my goals for all of you for today are to, first of all, make sure that you understand how behaviors are learned and maintained. Also, how to identify and define those target behaviors in your children that you would like to change, and how to select the most appropriate intervention strategies for those specific behaviors. Also, how to implement behavior change interventions that are really simple and effective. So let's start off by asking, what are behaviors? What are challenging behaviors? Here are some examples of behaviors you might be concerned about. So maybe some crying, tantruming, screaming or yelling, or even some aggression like hitting or kicking or biting, or just general disruption like throwing things. Are there any specific behaviors that you're concerned about for your child? Feel free to write those into the chat. If you don't have any concerns right now, it's still important to understand what to do if and when these problems do begin to appear, so that you feel prepared and you're not thrown off by it. And here's just a short video that we're gonna watch.
I'm a little monkey, pacifier junkie. I love Cheerios, they fit in my nose. Peanut butter goes far into your VCR, har, 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 har. I'm your toddler.
Ask a toddler. Special delivery. Number 1, how to throw a tantrum. Here's how I like to throw a tantrum. Do lots of crying. Kicking. Play around the race. Throwing stuff is good. Bang your heads against the wall. A tantrum soon.
So even though that girl in the video is really cute, if you've seen a couple of these behaviors in your child, I'm sure you didn't think that was so cute. And that's completely normal. So what I want you to know after today is what to do when you see these behaviors from your child. So let's talk a little bit, oh, you can go back. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about why these behaviors are occurring. So the main reason is usually for communication. I want you to think about what it would feel like to have no way to communicate using your voice or your hands. Without some of the communication abilities and skills that most of us develop throughout our childhood and our adulthood, what is left is that problematic behavior that we were seeing in the video. So if you think about very young children or those that are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, oftentimes they don't have the communication skills required for explaining what they need or what they want. And so these behavior problems that we end up seeing are just their method of communication. So how do you think that these problem behaviors are learned? So really there's a learning process that happens when a child learns to behave in a certain way. So first, as you can see in the top circle on the slide, the child displays the behavior. So let's say they display something like crying or hitting. And then looking at the bottom right circle, which is next, the parent usually reacts by giving some sort of attention. So let's say something like saying, "Stop hitting me." And then what happens is that the child's behavior is reinforced because really what they were looking for was that attention to begin with, and that's what they got. So as you can see on these little green pop-up circles, the child cries and hits, the parent gives attention, and then therefore the child stops the behavior. And as a consequence, the child's behavior is then reinforced. So if you think about it, it's actually a very simple process. The most interesting part, and the part that parents are often unaware of, is that when your child displays a negative behavior and you give them that attention by telling them to stop, that actually reinforces your own behavior as a parent as well. Because you told them to stop and you gave that attention, they actually stopped the behavior, which is what you wanted. So really your own tendency to give the attention has been reinforced as well. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So I'm going to give you a more specific example that perhaps you know very well. So you've cooked a nice meal and it's time to sit down together and eat dinner. You say to your child, "It's time for dinner. Please turn off the TV and come sit down at the table." This prompts a huge tantrum and your child is now refusing to eat dinner because they don't want to turn off the TV. So what happens is that you decide, let's just go ahead and eat dinner in front of the TV. As a result, what did the child learn? If you look inside of the orange box, you'll see that the tantrum and refusal to eat dinner led your child to eating dinner in front of the TV. And consequently, they learned that if they cry and say they won't eat, you'll let them watch TV during dinner. So what is really happening is that they're learning to communicate through their behavior rather than through their words. The good news here is that just like your child can learn these negative behaviors, they can also learn new and more appropriate behaviors, which is what we're going to be discussing today.
Okay, so getting into the basics of behavior. Here we see a behavioral contingency model. It has 4 terms. At the core, of course, is the behavior. We all know what that is. It is that challenging behavior that is explicit. We can see it. We all can agree that it's a challenging behavior. But before that behavior even starts, there's something that happens in the beginning, which is known as an antecedent. Antecedents are known as those triggering events that start the behavior to occur. So it's anything that happens before that behavior occurs. For example, it could be maybe the parent is on the phone and is not able to provide attention for the child. And thus the child will engage in challenging behavior to get the parent's attention. There's also something that happens on the back end of that, which is the consequence. So consequence here refers to anything that's happening immediately after that behavior occurs. So consequence for attention could be that the parent is giving in to the attention when the child's doing the challenging behavior. And as Dr. Slotwiner mentioned, it is inadvertently reinforced because the parent's just trying to do anything, any means possible to try to alleviate the behavior. And even though the consequence occurs after the behavior, it still is going to increase the future likelihood of that behavior to occur. So we have our ABC model here. There's also something happening even before the antecedent, which is known as the motivational operation or a setting event, something that kind of sets the stage for this to occur. These may be more like the child is hungry, the child is tired, maybe they haven't had access to their iPad in a while, so it makes the behavior more likely to occur. So this ABC model is just something to refer to when we're thinking about what surrounds the behavior. In other words, what is maintaining that behavior? So we want to find out why the behavior is occurring. It's nice to know what the behavior looks like and appreciate the problem, but then we also want to ask ourselves why the child is doing this behavior. In other words, what is the function of the behavior? All behavior is rational, it is done for a purpose, and it's a means of communication. So in these three pictures here, these kind of highlight the main three functions of behavior. There's actually a fourth one that I'll touch on at the end. But in that first picture here, we have this kid crying. Maybe he wants access to the iPad or tablet or phone. So his crying, that challenging behavior, is a means to gain access to a tangible or an item or a material. In other words, the child is acting out because they want something in the environment. The second main form of a function of behavior is to either obtain attention, or sometimes it could be to avoid attention. More popular is to gain attention though. So the child is acting out in a means that the parent or teacher or the adult in the child's life will give them that attention that they're craving. This can look a few different ways. It could be like asking inappropriately for attention. It could be throwing a toy item to get kind of like a bad kind of attention, a negative kind of attention from the parent. And we think to ourselves, why would the child want such attention, even if it's negative? But the fact is that children often prefer that bad kind of attention versus no attention at all. And then our third main form of function of behavior is to escape or to get out of tasks. So in this picture here, this kid is doing work. He's very frustrated with this homework. So he's going to be engaging in challenging behavior so he can escape that difficult task for him. There is a fourth function of behavior that is more applicable to children with autism spectrum disorder, but it's not limited to children with autism, and that is sensory. So if a child is doing a behavior, it may be to gain some sensory stimulation. For example, maybe rubbing their hands, maybe playing with water, making a mess in the sink, just because that's naturally reinforcing sensory-wise for them. It could also be for purposes of sensory aversion. So the child may be engaging in the challenging behavior to avoid some sort of sensory stimulation. So here we have laid out the four main functions of behavior. Again, to review: attention, access to tangibles or items, to escape from demands, and sensory. And here are all examples of what these could look like. So for attention, we have the child screaming or throwing toys when they notice that the antecedent caregiver's on the phone. So caregiver's on the phone, which leads to them screaming, throwing toys to get that attention. Now the caregiver may give attention by saying, stop throwing those toys, you're gonna break something. And even though they're trying to get the behavior to stop, it's actually reinforcing to the child because that's still classified as attention. So they are getting that function that they needed. For access to tangibles, we may have a child who is throwing a tantrum. They drop to the floor if they can't have another cookie for dessert. So the parents not wanting this behavior, they may give in and give the child that cookie, which will reinforce that child to act in that tantrum way again, thinking, oh, if I tantrum, if I drop to the floor, that's how I get that cookie. They've learned that. For escape from demands, a child may be crying when they're asked to clean up their toys. So that antecedent, parents ask them to clean their toys, they're going to engage in crying because they don't want to do it. And then the caregiver just gives in and wants a child to just calm down and takes away that demand. Okay, you don't have to clean the toys, we can do it later, it's fine. It gets the child to stop crying in the moment. So it's reinforcing for that parent to keep using that strategy. But unfortunately, it will increase the future likelihood of that child crying when they're asked to pick up toys at a later time. And then finally, I went through a couple of these sensory examples, but another one could be a child bites themselves throughout the day, even when they're alone, just because it's naturally reinforcing for them. So here the caregiver may try to help or block the behavior, but the child will still continue. So that first step is really identifying the function of behavior. We're going to touch on strategies in a minute, but the first question to even decide what strategy to use would be figure out why the child is doing what they're doing. So you can ask yourself, what do I typically do to get my student, my child to stop engaging in the behavior? Am I, inadvertently giving them more attention? Am I giving them the desired item they want? Am I taking away something that they don't want to do? So respectively, we have attention seeking, access to a tangible or material item, and then escape from demands. Okay, so here we're going to do a little bit of practice, and you guys can feel free to write your comments in the chat. We're going to try to identify the function of this child's behavior.
No, that's Mama.
Do whatever you would typically do.
Give in.
If that's what you do, because that's...
Here, let me get you some. Let me get you some.
Okay, so if you think you have a good idea of the function of that child's behavior, you can go ahead and write that in the chat. I'll give you a couple seconds before I give you the answer. So the child was crying, whining, tantruming to try to get that item. So access to a preferred item, tangible material, right? And then the parent kind of gave in and the child learned, okay, if I cry, if I whine, that is how I get what I want off of the counter. So they're more likely to engage in that behavior later on. Good job, guys. We have one more video for you. So again, try to figure out the function of that child's behavior.
Come on, Paul's watching. Go back to the kitchen. Go back to the living room. Already starting to get up.
Okay, so Give you guys a few seconds to think about that one. This one is very clearly to obtain or to get attention from his caregivers, right? You can see he's clearly throwing himself on the floor whenever he sees that parent is watching. So children are very smart and they do behavior that is adaptable and they know serves a purpose. So the purpose here is to get attention. Okay, so the main premise here is first identify that function of behavior. Once we do that, we can tailor the strategy to meet the function of the behavior, whether we're doing something to prevent it, whether we're doing something to teach a new functional way of asking for that, or whether we are tailoring our consequences to that function. So how are behaviors maintained? We took a look at that 4-term contingency, that ABC model, antecedents, behavior, consequences. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So here we have reinforcement and punishment. So this could be a whole lecture in and of itself, but basically here, reinforcement, we are talking about the increasing the frequency of the behavior, or reinforcement is the future likelihood of that behavior happening. It makes it more likely to happen. Punishment is just the opposite. So it decreases the future likelihood of that behavior to happen. So oftentimes when we're talking about reinforcement and punishment, they could either be classified as positive or negative. This doesn't mean good and bad. Instead, positive means that we are applying something, and negative means that we are taking something away. So this is actually very confusing. So I'm going to take a little bit and give you guys examples for each of these. So when we're talking about positive reinforcement, we're taking that positive, meaning we're applying something, we're adding something, and we're looking at reinforcement. So we're increasing the future likelihood of that behavior to occur. So a good example here would be using praise, right? Using specific labeled praise to tell the child, good job, I like what you're doing, in efforts to increase that behavior later on down the road. And we're adding something, we're adding that praise, so that's what makes it positive. We also have what's called negative reinforcement. So again, here we're trying to increase the future frequency of this behavior to occur, but we're taking something away from the environment to make it more likely to occur. So this could be something where you're taking away something that's aversive to the child, something that they don't like doing. So a popular example could be maybe in a classroom where the child has to do a worksheet, and if they do the first half of the worksheet really well, then they don't have to do the second half of that worksheet. So they're kind of getting out of something that's really hard for them because they did the work. So it reinforces their ability to do that work by taking away something that's aversive for them. Then when we look at punishment, again, so we're looking at the decrease in future frequency of the behavior. For positive punishment, this means we are adding something where we're trying to decrease that behavior in the future. A popular example here would be spanking. Of course, we would not advocate for spanking of the child. I'm just using this as an example for right now, but it is positive because we're adding something, that spank, in efforts to decrease the future likelihood of that behavior to happen. So there's research to suggest that spanking does not work. Instead, we want to focus more on the reinforcement and extinction, which I will touch on in a little bit. And then finally, we have our negative punishment. So here, negative means we're taking something away from the environment in efforts to decrease that behavior from happening, that punishment part. So an example here could be maybe the child lost their recess. So because they engaged in a challenging behavior, they lose out on that valuable time. So it's taking away something from them in efforts to punish that behavior. Okay, so when we're looking at reinforcement, obviously we want to focus more on the reinforcement piece than the punishment piece, especially if it's like really adversive. So ways to apply reinforcement would be to do it during or immediately after a good behavior. This will just make it more likely for the child to understand, okay, I did this good behavior and I got this type of reward or this kind of attention like right after. So it's something that's reinforcing for them. They're going to be more likely to do that behavior in the future because they have that tied to the caregivers giving them what they want, that function of the behavior. For this, you also want to be as descriptive and explicit as possible so the child knows exactly what it is that you want them to do more often. So an example here for using that specific labeled praise would be, "Oh, Johnny, I really love how you are sharing with Amy," right? To increase the future frequency of the sharing ability. It could be, "Oh, thank you so much for putting your toys in the toy bin. You know, I am so proud of you for following first time listening," those types of things. You also can use various forms of attention. So it doesn't have to be praise all the time. You can sometimes pair it with maybe tickles, cuddles, anything that you know that your child likes and finds reinforcing. It's also important to be enthusiastic when you are delivering the verbal praise. So being very genuine, being very excited and over the top, because you know this behavior is something that you want to see happen more often. So you're going to make a big deal about it so they know that what's expected for them later. And throughout the process, you of course want to make sure that your reinforcers are effective. What one child finds reinforcing is not true for every child. So it really is making sure that the reinforcer that you selected is applicable to your child. They find it motivating and they are engaged and they want to do that good behavior more often. And it may change over time too, developmentally as well. So always continuously making sure that the reinforcer is effective. The basic premise behind reinforcement is that we want to catch the child being good. This is often the hardest skill for parents, for teachers, for caregivers in general to learn to use this strategy. Because oftentimes we only notice the challenging behaviors that our children present. So we're going out of our way to catch them doing the desired behavior. And this way we are catching them being good. We are catching them, doing the right thing in efforts to reinforce that behavior and make it more likely to happen in the future. Okay, on the other side of things, we have extinction. And here we're not talking about the dinosaurs. Rather, we're talking about a reduction in behavior after the reinforcement is removed. So we're trying to reinforce that good behavior and we want to reduce that problem behavior. So the behavior stops or occurs much less frequently because it is no longer being reinforced. We're being very strategic and smart about when we're giving those reinforcers. Only when the child is doing that good behavior will we give them what they're trying to get, that function of behavior. If they're not doing what we like, then we may use another strategy, which is just not reinforcing at this moment. So an important thing to touch on here too is often things get worse before they get better. That is, the problem behaviors may become more severe once you stop reinforcing them, or children may try alternative behaviors to get what they want. So for example, if they're trying to get attention, maybe they're talking to you like over and over again, yelling. And if you are working to extinguish that behavior, you're not reinforcing it anymore, you're not giving them that attention, they may try another means to get your attention, such as really touching you, maybe like physical, could be yelling even louder, anything to get that function that they were getting before. So oftentimes things get worse before they get better, but that is just evidence that your strategy is working. So here's some examples for extinction in everyday life. The same is true for adults. So we're talking about challenging behaviors in children right now, but behavior and these functions of behavior work for adults as well. So for example, if you are at a vending machine and you press a button to get a snack or to get a drink, and that snack or drink does not come out, you may start to do other types of behavior. You may try to kick the button, maybe you may try to shake the machine to get it out. You're going to be trying different behaviors, but you're still not going to get that snack. So eventually you're just going to walk away because you're no longer being reinforced by those behaviors. So that is just to say that these behaviors will work, or these strategies will work, as long as you stick to them and your child understands that they're only getting reinforced for good behaviors and we're extinguishing the problem behaviors. So how do we even find a reinforcer that works for the child? First, we want to think of any toys, activities, or items that the child loves to play with. We can simply observe the child. We can ask other caretakers of the child, what do they think that they play with a lot? What are types of things that we can choose as reinforcers? And oftentimes reinforcers are given throughout the day, or a child may just, for example, have access to the iPad sometimes. So it's just selecting that as a reinforcer, what we know is motivating to a child, and strategically and contingently giving them that reinforcer when they do the good behavior. The second question you want to ask while identifying reinforcers is, can you limit this item? So let's say a child is really reinforced by eating dinner or eating lunch. Obviously, that's not something you can limit contingent on their behavior. So that would not be a good reinforcer to select. The best reinforcers are the things that the child finds rewarding and you have access to limit this item. So we talk a lot about functions of behavior and, the ABC model, how this all works, but how can we actually help our children? What do we do after we've identified all of that? We can tackle the ABC model. We can do different strategies to identify each of those different parts of the ABC model. For antecedents, we're looking at prevention strategies or antecedent-based strategies or interventions. In other words, these are ways to make events and interactions that trigger the behavior easier for the child to manage. So we're using prevention strategies. We are doing these strategies before we even see the problem behavior. So a popular example of a prevention strategy is the use of a token board. So this could be something you give for your child if they're having a hard time with something. So if they're having a hard time completing their schoolwork, you can show them, okay, we're working for computer time, if that's identified as a reinforcer. And then just seeing this chart too, they know, okay, I'm going to get 5 stars or whatever it is that you guys decide on. And then I get to earn my computer time. And the 5 stars are applied every time the child shows that they're working hard, for example, and it's going to kind of be intermittent too. So kind of like on a schedule of reinforcement that you decide, and just so the child knows that they're continuously working for something and they will get that at the end. It's important here to start small. So if working is really challenging for the child and is really frustrating for the child in the moment, maybe not starting off with a big token board that says like you need 10 stickers. So maybe it is just 5, maybe it is just 3, maybe it's just 2. And it's just working your way up so the child understands that, okay, I'm getting that immediate reinforcer of the sticker every time, or that star every time, and note that I'm working towards this. So even though you're not giving them something like a consequence, you are still getting at that prevention beforehand, saying like, okay, we're getting this, we're working towards this before the child engages in any problem behavior. Another popular prevention strategy would be the use of a visual schedule. So this may be something to lay out the child's routine, to lay out the expectations, just any way to visually show the child the process of the day or what they're working towards. This is especially true for children with autism who may have difficulty with transitions, right? They may have difficulty with understanding the order or routine of the day. And children with autism often are very routine bound. So we're kind of using this to our advantage here and showing them the schedule. And these are the expectations. And this is how we are going to follow our day. Here are 3 other prevention strategies, and I know there are a lot of different ones. It's important to find out what works for the child, so you may implement maybe 1 or 2 to start off with, see how the child responds to that, and then maybe implement some more throughout the time that you're working with them on whatever behavior. So the use of a timer is a great way to indicate, okay, it's time to transition to the next activity. It's a way for the child to visually see, okay, I have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute to play, and then I have to work. There's also the use of a first then board. So this is showing the child what they need to work on first, and then they're going to get that reinforcer. So they do work, then they get a snack. In addition to the visual first then board, this is something you could also use in your language. So before the problem behavior occurs, you can keep reminding the child, okay, first we work, then we get our snack, or then we get our playtime. And then we also have choices. Oftentimes, just presenting the child with a choice will make them more likely to follow through and do that behavior. Your choices could be 2 things that they already have to do anyways. It could be maybe choosing, okay, Johnny, do you want to do your homework or do you want to pick up your toys? Knowing that, you know, both of those activities are preferred, but you're giving them the choice, they're more likely to follow through. Little things throughout the day too, like what marker do you want to use to color this or to work on this homework? What worksheet do you want to use? Just giving them, presenting them with that choice will make them more likely to follow through. Oftentimes, a prevention strategy is to avoid the word no. So sometimes the word no is very triggering to a child, no matter what it is that they're being told no to. Just hearing no, don't, stop. So a way to kind of tackle this is changing your language. You could say no, but with 2 preferred options. For example, you may say, I'm sorry, you can't have the fire truck right now. Johnny's playing with it, but you could have the police car or the ambulance while you wait. So you are saying no, but notice in that in those couple of sentences, you don't directly say no. You're kind of inferring it, and you're giving them 2 other options as well. Another option here would be to say yes, but no. So sure, you can play with the fire truck just as soon as you pick up your toys. So letting them know first this, then this. So in both of these examples, you're not directly saying no. So you're kind of avoiding that triggering word for the child, but at the same time, you're still all saying what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Okay, so we talked about the antecedent-based strategies or the prevention strategies. In the middle, we have the behavioral or teaching strategies. So if a child doesn't know how to read, of course, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we'll teach them how to swim. If a child doesn't know how to add, we'll teach them. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to teach them, right? It's not something that the child is doing because they're trying to manipulate the situation or what have you. It is truly a skill that may be difficult for them to do. So we want to explicitly teach the child. And we want to teach them a replacement skill. In other words, a new skill to teach throughout the day to replace the challenging behavior. So something they may do instead of engaging in that challenging behavior. For example, if they are crying and throwing a tantrum because they want a break, maybe we can teach them an appropriate way to request a break. Maybe using your words or maybe using a break card. And we want to tailor these to the main functions of behavior too. So this is what is called functional communication training. Instead of what the child is doing, their challenging behaviors, we're telling them how to get access to our attention. We're telling them how to escape from, heavy work demands. And we're telling them how to access items. Okay, so it may be like, oh, use your words, use kind words, use a break card, a symbol, something that's easy for them to do, a gesture to let the parent know or the teacher know that they need a break or whatever it is that they need. Oftentimes people will say, well, aren't they just getting what they want? Yes, but they're getting it a more functional way or a better way. It's kind of like a replacement. It's an alternative to that problem, that challenging behavior that you were seeing before. So of course, we want to teach them how to say it more appropriately, how to pull out their break card, but this won't be a long-term solution. Over time, we can fade when they get that reinforcement of getting what they want using this. But for a child where it's really frustrating and this behavior is really challenging, it's a hard skill for them to learn, then we do want to start teaching them how to ask appropriately and giving them what they need in the moment while they're having this difficult time. And then, as I said, you can gradually fade it over time. Okay, I'm going to pass it back over to Dr. Slotweiner, who will tackle the consequence strategies at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Goldberg. So what I'm going to talk about now are some behaviors that you yourself can do and engage in when your child is engaging in some challenging behaviors. So we can change our own behavior as well, not just that of our children. So this is really where that extinction comes into play. So sometimes you really just got to wait it out and provide as little attention as possible during a tantrum until the child is calmed down and they're no longer engaging in the behavior you don't want to see. So once they're done, obviously we would provide them some attention. So we really want to ignore the problem behaviors because giving them attention tends to reinforce them, because what they're usually looking for is that attention itself that we were talking about. So by giving the attention, we're causing the negative behavior to be more likely to happen again in the future, which is not what we want, right? So just as a side note, because I saw also that someone was asking this in the chat, please keep in mind that if your child is engaging in a challenging behavior that is dangerous, the best way to deal with that is to correct or block the behavior while engaging in minimal verbal communication with the child and avoiding eye contact. So for example, let's say that during a tantrum, your child decides to grab a chair, get on it, and climb onto the counter. What you would do is simply take the child down from the counter, block access to the chair until after they've calmed down, and don't talk to them while you're doing this or make eye contact with them. Just do it quickly and continue to ignore their behavior. So this way you're making sure that your child is safe, but you're also avoiding the reinforcement for their negative behaviors. So like we talked about before, reinforcement also increases the likelihood that those behaviors that you do like will reoccur. So you want to keep in mind to make sure that you catch your kids being good and give them a lot of attention when you see behaviors that you like. Now, does your child always listen to you when you ask them to do something? Probably not. So this is a great strategy here for teaching your child that when you say something, they need to listen and do as you say. So we're always going to start by giving one verbal prompt. Like you can see in the example here, something like, Johnny, pick up your toy. So we want to make sure that we're giving our command only one time. We want to avoid becoming kind of like that broken record. And getting our kids used to us repeating a command more than one time. So keep in mind that the more times you say a command and the more times your child doesn't listen, you're teaching your child that in fact, they don't actually have to listen to you since nothing is really happening. You just keep saying that command over and over again. So after the verbal prompt, you want to wait about 5 seconds to give your child a chance to comply. And then you'll model it for them. So the point here is also to make sure that your child understands what you want them to do. So in this case, you would say, Johnny, pick up your toy like this. You do it. And then show your child what you want them to do. So after you've modeled the behavior for the child, you want to give them another 5 seconds to comply. And if they don't, you would move on to the third step that you see here, which is the hand over hand prompt. So here you actually take your child's hand and help them complete the action that you're asking them to do. So in this case, you would take your child's hand and using your own hand over theirs, you would help them pick up the toy. So after you do that, you would say, this is picking up your toy. So this whole flow teaches the child that when you say something to them, they follow through on it because you asked them only one time and you followed through until the action you wanted was completed. So we also need to think about having time to just calm down. So there are certain points in time when your child might just be really, really upset, right? It's really important not to try to reason with your child when they're kind of in their full-blown tantrum mode. If they're screaming and crying and tantruming, they're simply just not going to hear you. So here are some steps to follow if your child is just having a hard time calming down. So first, you want to put them in a safe and calm place. Don't give them any attention and just wait them out and allow them to just calm down. Only then would you consider implementing any other behavior strategies, because remember that when they're in their full-blown tantrum mode, they're just not listening to you. Okay, so I want you to always remember that behavior change can be really, really difficult. Behavior is usually not going to change overnight, and it requires a lot of patience and consistency. And it's okay to empathize with your child. Sometimes they're just really having a hard time. So when your child is upset over something like, for example, not being able to have access to the iPad, they are truly really upset. So what I want to leave you with is that the hardest part of behavior change is to recognize that in order to change our children's behavior, we also need to change our own behavior. That's really the first hurdle in getting children to where they need to be in terms of their behavior. So thank you for listening. And we're gonna open it up now to see if anybody has any questions that we would be happy to answer. And this is the contact information for our center here for the Developmental Assessment Clinic, where we work, if anyone is interested in calling and making an appointment for a developmental assessment. So you have the phone number and the email address. Okay. So I'll see what questions we have. I'm going to give a minute for people to write them in.
I do want to touch on that comment about what if the behavior is dangerous. And I think Dr. Slotweiner, emphasized that, of course, that's important, that's different. We don't want to completely ignore that behavior. That's actually a strategy that we call ignore the child, but not the behavior. So of course, you're going to block, you're going to attend to the child's behaviors and stop anything dangerous that's going on. But at the same time, you're doing it with that purposeful, neutral face. You're not like showing them that you're giving them attention. It's more like you're addressing the situation and kind of like moving on, like stopping that dangerous behavior, but doing so in a way where you're not inadvertently giving it attention.
Okay. So we have quite a few questions here. So I'm going to ask the students if they can just pick one for us and read it out.
So how do you address lying or making up stories?
Good question. Okay, so with lying, making up stories, I know it's hard to say that, the behavior is not manipulative, but it truly isn't. Every behavior serves a purpose. It is all very rational. So that first step is identifying why are they lying, right? Is it to get attention? And if so, then we're going to use that planned ignoring for the lie when we know it's a downright lie, but then reinforcing at other times, catching them when they are telling the truth and being explicit, letting them know, oh, I love how you told that detailed occurrence that happened. Like you said, just what happened today. And I'm really proud of you for telling the truth. That's a really good skill. So to answer the question, identify the function first. With lying, it's probably attention seeking, but maybe it is to like access for a tangible or maybe to escape something. So first step is figuring out why the child is lying.
I did see that someone here was asking if our clinic works on a sliding scale. So I just wanted to say that right now we're funded by a grant. So you can actually get your child assessed at no cost to you. But we are on quite a long wait list at the moment. But if you're interested, I would encourage you to call in and get on that wait list as soon as possible.
There were a few questions regarding how to apply the concepts for older children and adolescents.
Absolutely. So you want to be, developmentally appropriate. The same basic principles of the strategies work for kids of all ages and adults for that matter. So finding out why it is that they're doing what they're doing, and you're tying the reinforcer to what's salient for them. So if it's an older child, maybe they get to play with their friends, or they get, they get to watch TV for a certain amount of time. They get to be on their phone for an amount of time. So it's finding what works for that individual. So the basic premise is there, like find out what's reinforcing for them. Of course, you want to be developmentally appropriate. Usually these challenging behaviors, a lot of them that we spoke about, happen in younger children, but behaviors can certainly happen in older children as well. So always finding what's reinforcing for them. How can you make that reinforcement contingent on their good behavior versus their bad behavior? I see a couple questions here about what if it's hard to identify the function. Even as like a mental health professional, sometimes it's hard when parents just tell you like, oh, this is happening. There's no clear antecedent. There's no clear triggering event. All this behavior is just happening. There's always a reason for behavior to occur. So what I would advise in that situation is take time to collect some data. So that's often what we do. The first step is trying to figure out why is this behavior happening. So every time the behavior happens, you can have, the parents write down, okay, behavior's happening, and then they can ask themselves, okay, what just happened right before? Like, who was involved? What environment was a child in? Did I say like no to something? Was I not giving enough attention? And then also identifying what happened at the back end. Like, how did I respond to that? So the child did this challenging behavior. What did I give as a consequence? Even if it wasn't on purpose, like maybe you did give attention, maybe you did eventually give in and give that child access to what they were doing the challenging behavior for. So first step would be collecting data. Sometimes it isn't as clear cut. Sometimes behaviors serve multiple functions. They're doing it for a couple different reasons. So collecting data, because there is always a reason why. So if it's not as clear in the beginning, take that time to figure out what is the data telling us. And there are helpful tools on the ABC model online too. So if you just search like ABC data collection, there are a whole bunch, or a parent can just take notes on what happens right before, right after.
There was also a question regarding strategies for handling tantrums when you're in public. So like in the grocery store, restaurants.
Yes, that is an excellent question, and a question a lot of parents ask. So with those behaviors that may be severe and you kind of have to give it in public, but you still might try the strategy. If you know that you don't have the time, or maybe you don't want the tantrum to occur, there's no way that you can hold to that strategy and it's just going to be a back and forth, you can give in immediately. Okay, so that's not the preferred way to tackle it, but if it is truly something where it's happening out in public and you're not going to be able to stick to that planned ignoring, just give in immediately before the child is reinforced for all that tantruming behavior outside. So if you truly can't do it in that type of setting, which is very valid, and if that's something that you discuss and you're like, okay, this is something that I truly cannot tolerate when we're outside, just give in, and then we can tackle it at a later time.
I see a lot of questions here about being able to get access to this presentation after. The presentation is being recorded and you should be able to have access to it through the NOVA website.
We also had another question.
Can you hear her? I can't hear
No,
her.
I can't hear her.
Try again. I don't know why we can't hear you. You're not on mute. I'm going to reshare the slide because I see someone asking for that. So with the contact information.
Yeah.
So this is if you're interested in a developmental evaluation. So ultimately testing for autism or other developmental delays.
So I see a question here that someone asked about what happens when a child tantrums and I'm trying to get him or her to complete a task. So remember when your child is in a full-blown tantrum, it's going to be really hard to get them down from that and to reason with them and to get them to do what you want them to do. So keep in mind when they're really tantruming and they're going all at it, sometimes you really just need to give them that second, like we said before, to just avoid giving the attention and just ignore it until they learn how to calm down. And only then you would approach them and say something like, good job calming down. I really like how you were able to do that all by yourself. And then trying again to make them complete the task and maybe asking them exactly what happened, what was difficult for them.
Yes. And going back to that question about, those tantrums that happen in public, like it's true, like if you truly can't stick to the strategy, it's better to just give in at the start, but you can also tackle it at another end. So when the child is nice and calm, before you even go into the store, maybe laying out the expectation, saying, okay, you're going to stand by me. If you want something, you're going to use your words, just letting them know very clearly the expectations before you're in that situation. But I understand that it is very hard in the moment and, you just have to do your best with catching them being good. So if they are usually throwing that tantrum out in public or wherever, you want to spend more time catching them being nice out in public, doing that desired behavior out in public and letting them know that you're proud of them and they're doing a good job. I'm going to explain again the difference between reinforcement and punishment. It sounds very easy at face value, but it's very difficult for people to understand. So it is something that we spend a lot of sessions talking about. So reinforcement, we're just talking about increasing the future likelihood of that behavior. We want to reinforce desired behaviors, good behaviors. For punishment, punishment means you're decreasing the future occurrence of that behavior.
Can we do this with coworkers and friends?
I tell the parents I'm working with too, like you can use it on your significant others as well. Like it works for adults as much as it works for children. You just got to find what's reinforcing for them. Use that specific label of praise, letting them know exactly what it is like you like them doing. They're more likely to do it in the future. If you think about it, like with a supervisor too, like if they only told you the negative things, you're not going to want to listen to them as much as when they tell you some good things too, because that's reinforcing for you. So you're going to, you're more of a hard worker. You're going to, do a better job at work when you hear that positive praise.
So I jumped in because we are right at 1 o'clock. I'm not sure if you wanted to handle any questions, but I wanted to let you know that I respond well to chocolate as a positive reinforcement. However, I think I get some acid reflux going after Christmas. So hopefully everyone enjoyed the presentation, and Any final parting words?
Thank you guys so much for attending this session. This topic is, of course, very near and dear to my heart. I love talking about challenging behaviors because they are something that we can fix. We can take a systemic look at it, and it's something that we can change.
Well, you can see by the chats that lots of folks really enjoyed the presentation. And thank you for our students as well for joining us to assist with questions.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.